Welcome to episode 92 of the Steady On podcast, Send Out Your Light, with me, Angie Bauman, and my guest today, singer, songwriter, and author, Sandra McCracken. I talked to Sandra about something I'm all too familiar with, and maybe you are too, the desire for God's light and truth to be present in my situations and seasons of darkness. Most of us don't long for times of darkness, but every one of us will face them. And when we do encounter times of suffering, confusion, or grief, we can call out like the psalmist does in the verse that is the theme of Sandra's new book and the one I chose for this episode, Psalm 43:3, which says, "Oh, send out your light and truth. Let them lead me." Let them lead me. Them, not my current circumstance, but the light and truth that comes from God alone. Sandra reminds us through her music and her writing that God's light and truth are always present. Even when we're struggling to see it and believe it, God is sending his light and truth to us to guide us and show us our next steps. Sandra is a soft-spoken, gentle spirit that uses her voice to powerfully point us to the light and truth we have as children of God. Let's listen in. Hello, Steady On community. We are so glad you are here for this Steady On podcast episode. I'm Angie Bauman, and my guest today is Sandra McCracken. Sandra, welcome.
Hey, so good to be with you, Angie.
We are delighted to have you. Sandra has a new project out. She is a singer-songwriter, performer, music producer, and author. She has written songs for Ellie Holcomb, and I have read that you've had a song on Grey's Anatomy. So that's wide ends of the spectrum there. You have a lot.
Yes, those things are both true. Nashville's a great community, and sometimes surprising things happen in that creative space.
And you're a featured writer for She Reads Truth and Christianity Today. And your new book is called Send Out Your Light, which is based around Psalm 43. And you describe Psalm 43 as a prayer for rescue. And in it, the psalmist asks God to send out your light and speaking to God. And so I just wonder, what does that verse mean to you? And how are you hoping to inspire and encourage readers as you point them specifically to that verse, that message?
Yeah, thank you for asking. The book took a little while in the making, just thinking about, as a songwriter, I'm used to writing in 3-minute song versions,
Yes.
And one kind of set of parameters, and then working on something more long form. I spent a lot of time with this psalm, and I would say that the psalm really has followed me around. And what I love about Psalm 43 is that it's a good example of a song that keeps calling you back to, it moves from the first part of the psalm, which is complaint, and then the second part of the psalm is worship. And so right in the middle is this verse, "Send out your light and your truth and let them lead me." And I think that's what really keeps coming up like a refrain for me, and just this focus on his giving us a new vision, that he's always up to something new.
What do you think the light that the psalmist is asking for? What does that mean to him, you think? Or to you? Yeah.
That's a good question. No one's ever asked that. That, I think, if you try to define light, looking at what Scripture says about light, I think we see first that it's the very glory of God, the nature of God. So when we experience the light of God, we're not only, it's not just like a flashlight going forward, but it's also just his radiance on us. And it's, we are, as it says in different places in Scripture, like we're made in his image. So as we receive his light, then we become radiant with his glory. And then our lives are really different than if we're in shadow or not, responding to that glory in the same way. So I think that's what it means, is like to come alive to his glory as he shines his light and, his face, his countenance, his love for us.
As you're talking, I'm thinking of, I think it's Isaiah 61:1, if you know better, correct me, where it says, "Arise, shine, for your light has come." And I think about that as you're talking about this, because there's an action in that for me, right? Arise, receive, if you will, and then reflect and shine. And I feel like that's what you're saying a little bit here too, right? As we receive his light, then we can be a reflection of that light as well.
Yeah, that's a great reference. That Isaiah 61 keeps coming up, and I think you're right, and I think it echoes throughout Scripture in different places and in different ways. But that question would be a helpful one to ask, even in challenging times. Like, what does it mean to experience the light of God? You know, like the old hymn, "Be Thou My Vision," would just continue to call us to ask God to give us vision. I think the Psalm does that as well. And so, in that place, I think that's a good practice to take on.
Absolutely. And the verse also talks about God sending out his truth. And I'm wondering, what does that mean for you? What is God's truth in your life right now?
We're bombarded with messages all the time through advertising and just, modern life and our own inner thoughts. We're bombarded with things that are just not true. And so when I hear that in Psalm 43, send out your truth, if we just took that piece of it and spent some time thinking about it, it feels like a relief to be told, hey, he's going to tell you the truth. He's going to, like, his voice is going to differentiate from all the other voices that would tell you all kinds of other things. Like, you need to buy this, or you need to achieve this, or you need to grasp for power. Those are all the other voices would compete. But I think his truth cuts straight through the middle and continues to present reality for what it is. So I think something about God's truth really aligns with reality. And when we worship, when we engage with him, when we receive his glory, we're being more aligned with that truth.
How do you separate that? I'm just curious, because I think you're so right. There are so many voices. There are so many messages. I think about the ways that our culture encourages us to compare. I would think in the business that you're in the city that you live in, there are a lot of things encouraging you to get ahead, to make a name for yourself, and how do you continue to hear God's truth above and add anything else that I didn't think of, that might be messages to you and others, in your circle that simply aren't aligned with the truth that is God?
Well, there are spiritual practices that people, followers of Jesus, have been doing for a long time, as long as there has been, faith formation. There are these practices that are sort of built in that have been called like the means of grace. And the means of grace would be ways that we submit ourselves to the truth. So confession and the sacraments and community with one another. All of these things are practices that help us to come into alignment. And for me personally, I think it's sometimes it's as simple as just getting up early before everyone else in the house and trying to ask some of those questions, meditate on a few passages of scripture, and just hear the Lord's voice and kind of hear that before my feet hit the floor, or just before I'm running off to do all the emails and all the laundry and whatever else. So I think it's and then it's also other practices that are means of grace, like Sabbath, like as we are part of a community and we realize we need to rest, that can help too. So all these different ways that are sort of built into the Christian life historically can be ways that we unlock or activate that hope that we have.
Is songwriting a means of grace for you?
It is, for sure. Probably even before I started songwriting, it was journaling, and just the practice of writing something down was really helpful for me to get outside of my own head and put something on the page. So songwriting is another one. If I'm not a visual artist, but even trying any other kind of like art expression is really can be helpful. Taking a walk outside, getting up for the sunrise or staying up for the sunset, and just being intentional about connecting with the ways that God tries to get our attention. Those are all really helpful things.
I think that's so important, because I think often our prayer also is send out your light, send out your truth. And maybe what we say instead of that specifically is, just show me, help me understand, show me yourself. I think that's what we're asking for. I can't see you right now. I don't hear you right now. And I think it's really important that you mentioned some of those things, what you call means of grace. I agree with that description so much, because how is it that we are creating space for him to show us, for him to send out his light? Like, I think so often in my times of struggle, when I don't see or feel him, it's really about, okay, how do I need to adjust either my thinking, my expectations, my busyness, my space, because he is wanting to talk to us. I believe that he always wants to talk to us. He always wants to comfort us. He always wants to show us, and he is trying. But there are times, I think, when we simply cannot receive that. And partly because maybe he's showing us something that's not what we were hoping he would show us, right?
Yeah, and we're so easily distracted by whatever's right in front of us. So sometimes we miss the things that he's doing right in the, in a 24-hour period. There are just things that if we begin to tune our ear to hear that, I think we can start to become more aware of the ways that he's at hand doing that.
Yes. And recognize him in small things all the time, I think. So one of the other things you write about is the dark night of the soul. Would you talk to us a little bit about what you mean by that? What is the dark night of the soul?
Well, it's really a borrowed phrase. I know the Puritans and hymn writers and lots of folks have used that phrase, but it is inevitable. So if you haven't, you kind of walked through that. But I think that I say that with just hopefully with like a statement of comfort that we are all experiencing these times where our life circumstances do not align with our expectations. And right somewhere in that intersection, we have to sort of deal with, well, what do I believe? What does all this mean? Is God with me even when this is not what I planned or this is not what I hoped for? And that can either lead to bitterness and questioning and just sort of being in the pit as I've thought of it before. And like in Psalm 40, it talks about like I was in the pit. You lifted me up out of the pit. And I think that is a description of that dark night, whatever that looks like. And then we can honestly, in that, we realize we're not alone in it. We're not the first to walk through that, but we do have these promises to hang on to, and we do have like a loving Father that is tending to us, and even sometimes, right there in the middle of it, saying, this is for your good and my glory, and it doesn't feel like it right now, but there's an opportunity to trust him and build on those experiences.
So what are some of those promises that are important to you when you're experiencing these times of the dark night of the soul? You said to hang on to the promises. Are there some that are particularly important to you that you return to?
I return to Psalm 42 a lot. I love that psalm, and I love how it has like a call and response, like an old spiritual. It kind of says, like, it'll say a complaint and then it'll say, why are you downcast, oh my soul? And it's like this back and forth. And I love that about the psalm, and I've gone to it many times.
It's like it knows better, but it's still there.
It's true.
Yeah.
It really is. So, and I think it was probably originally connected. I've read that it was connected to Psalm 43 because they share a refrain. And so maybe at some point that was like one connected psalm. But there's so many psalms that I love, and a lot of passages in Isaiah. Also the vision that's written out in Revelation 21 and 22. It is a little bit hard for us to, it seems a little bit dreamlike to imagine this scene of the New Jerusalem. But that is tremendously helpful when you engage your mind and your heart to think about what is coming, and that there is a place for us, and that there is a city where God himself is the light, and Jesus is at the center, and there's no more sorrow or loss or sickness. And I think when we look toward that in the middle of the feeling of being in the pit, I think that is part of what like kind of helps us to ascend to be with Christ in that, knowing that day is coming.
Yeah, it's the unshakable hope that is ours, right? As believers, right? Hey, friend, I'm cutting in right here to ask you a question. What message does your heart long to hear? I wouldn't have been able to answer that question before I became a student of the Enneagram, but now I understand as an Enneagram Type 1 that what I most want to be able to believe about myself is that I'm good, And by studying and applying the promises of God, I can know that I am good because I'm His creation, and God looks upon His creation and calls it good. Genesis 1. A fabulous group of ministry friends of different Enneagram numbers from the Red House Writers Collective have joined me for the Steady On Ennea Longings podcast miniseries. The miniseries includes episodes on strengths, stresses, and core longings of each Enneagram number, along with biblical truth that speaks to the messages our hearts long to hear. The miniseries also features bonus episodes on typing and mistyping and addressing concerns some Christians have about using the Enneagram. Many of the guests have even included their own ministry freebies in the downloadable PDF workbook. You can grab all of these goodies filled with powerhouse voices by clicking the link in today's show notes. Thank you for listening. Now, back to our show. You talked about a couple of times, you've talked about how the Psalms go back and forth between complaint and worship. And sometimes they start with one, lead to another, but sometimes there's back and forth. What do you think helps us move from one to another? Because I think one of the things the Psalms does for me is it gives me permission. They give me permission to be in that sort of complainy, honest, vulnerable, and yet like unsatisfied almost, or fearful, or dry even. I don't see you, I don't hear you. Why so downcast, oh my soul? You know, it gives us permission for that. But then how do you not get stuck there, but be able to move from that complaint state to the worship state?
Sometimes I just have to wait it out a little bit, and I have to kind of...
I think that's very honest. Thank you.
Yeah. Do you ever feel like you're kind of stuck and you're just like, oh, I don't know how to not feel that, but so I can pray these words, I can take a walk, I can try to honestly, like the simplest things, like eat a good meal, and try to say like, hey, this is not the whole story, this is how I feel right now, this is not the whole story. And then I think there's some comfort in realizing that in any 24-hour period we're going to be all four seasons, and things might happen and they disrupt our plans or whatever we were going to do or whatever we hoped would happen. And so within that 24-hour rhythm, we realized that like we could feel a lot of different things, but the truth is steady and God's presence is steady. And so when we feel low, I think we can take some comfort in that and trust that, okay, it's gonna, like even 2 hours from now or 10 minutes from now, it's gonna be better than it is right this second.
Yes. I think that's so true. When I have feelings of anxiety or darkness, more anxiety, I think if I'm honest with myself and I ask like, what is this? Part of it is I'm looking too far down the road, right? I mean, that's just where I'm not comfortable in my present circumstance. I told you yesterday, my husband checked in on me late day. How's your day going? And I said, I think it's kind of swampy. And he's like, I don't know what that means. And I'm like, well, it's a little bit dark. It's kind of a little bit like hard to move through, but there's also kind of beauty around if I care to notice, you know what I mean? Like it's a little scary. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So I'm trying to kind of live in both places today, so, and he was making fun of me. He's like, you should be a writer. I'm like, maybe, but I'm learning to pause and say, sometimes I think it is, I'm like in a swampy place where it's like mucky, right? And it's like a little bit hard to move through. And yet there are beautiful things to notice. And it's maybe an unusual place or a foreign place. And yet I do feel like I'm making a little progress. And I'm one that tends to be maybe a little bit more black and white. Okay. Who am I kidding? A lot more black and white, where I want it to, if it's not all good, it's not good at all, And I think I'm as you're talking, I'm thinking a lot about that and how God is really inviting me. I think He invites all of us to say, in this 24-hour period, I love that comment. You're going to feel a variety of things, and I am in them all. Man,
I was just talking with a friend a week or so ago. Steve Garber was talking about how much we rely on metaphor. Like you're just saying, like you use this image of the swamp. And then you think about those moments when you're, and it sounds like you've done a lot of work with people recovering and healing and trauma. And I mean, sometimes in those moments when people are processing that, those metaphors are so helpful to just say like, oh, I'm in a swamp, so I just named it. And I can almost chuckle at the at the vividness of that image. But those things can be, if we can do that with one another, I think that also kind of helps you to realize, it's not permanent. This is not our permanent condition.
Yes. And I think to give grace to ourselves and to each other, because it is, as you write, the dark night of the soul. But it is, as you just said, not the forever place that we are, because God shines his light in the dark night of the soul. Yeah.
There's a little Jesus Storybook Bible. Sally Lloyd Jones has this little part, right, when it's like Jesus is born. There's in the story of him coming to be born in Bethlehem, and there's this little line that basically said, the stars are so much brighter when the sky is dark. There's just this sense that there is illumination. Even in the darkness, there is illumination that you will see when you look back, that at the time you don't really even recognize.
I love that. I love that so much. Did you experience, as you were working on this project, a time where it got swampy, if you will, like where you were trudging through, or it was dark a little bit? What did you learn? I would bet with most projects, there's a place where you ask the question, what am I doing and what is this for? Did you experience that at all with this?
I did. And I mean, some of it was just the newness, like doing something completely new.
Sure.
So saying yes to write something that was longer form. I was supposed to do 40,000 words, and I've never done anything like that. And I say that as an encouragement to say, I think we all have great capacity to try things, and it may not be like the best thing, but I think my self-doubt along the way was always a struggle. But I'm also really thankful that I said yes, and just to be able to offer up something that was like, okay, you could sit and think about how all the books that are so that are on your shelf that are just like way up here, but you can say yes to whatever God's call is on your life and give testimony and bear witness in whatever form and whatever place he offers. And so that for me was really like a struggle. The tension through the whole thing was just self-doubt. Like, you shouldn't be writing this. You don't really know what you're talking about.
Yes.
That voice that we all have,
yes.
And it was fun to talk with the team, even that was editing and publishing. They were teasing me, just basically saying, this is the normal experience. This is what everybody experiences. And so we need each other in times when we're trying something new, because it helps us to know that it's like, oh, we all feel this way.
Did you experience that? Thank you for sharing that with us. I appreciate it. I think that encourages a lot of us, because whatever the Lord is calling us to that is new feels scary. It just does. Mm-hmm. It does, because we feel it's unfamiliar and we feel ill-equipped. And part of what the Lord does, I believe this with all my heart, he calls us to things that are beyond the capabilities of our own resources, because he wants us to depend on him. Like, it's an invitation to depend on him. But then we go back and forth. I mean, I know I do. I depend on him, and then I try to do it myself. And there's that tension in that. But I'm wondering, in your earlier years of songwriting and performing, did you experience that and then move through it? Like, sort of that, was that a familiar feeling because of a different expression earlier?
Yeah, that's certainly true. And I would say especially around, so songwriting felt kind of like a private, expressive, practice that I was doing from when I was, a young teenager. But then when I would play songs out in a room full of people, that is the part where I was really intimidated. That was the more of the stretching struggle for me, because I was shy and I didn't really want to be up front. I didn't want to be on the microphone. So the Lord really used that, I think, to make just what he's doing in an ongoing way. He's used that and continues to use that, where it's like, oh, I don't know, I feel insecure about this, or I have things that I am not sure I'm going to be able to do this. But like you're saying, to be able to know that we have limitations, and to know that he's inviting us to go past those, because we can trust him to provide for us, and ultimately that, like, we can even trust him with like our performance, because whatever that is like, he's going to take care of us.
Yes.
So this is like a different paradigm, and it actually encourages us to step out and to do things that we would otherwise be too afraid to do.
I agree. I agree so much. I feel like one of the things the Lord tells me continually is, I didn't call you out here to forget you. Like, that's not, I'm not, I mean, that is one of my promises. I'm never going to forget you. I'm never going to leave you. But yet I approach things as if it's just me that has to take care of them. And he's still trying to solidify that in my mind. But it's tough though, because we do want to depend on ourselves. So I wonder, so I know Psalm 43 and Psalm 43:3 is really special to you, but I'm curious, did you have another, like in these times of maybe some self-doubt or this new experience, is there any other passage or verse or story in the Bible that kind of was just a helpful thing for you as you moved through the steps of this project even?
Hmm. Psalm 139 comes up a lot, and it's been one that I have loved for a long time. And I think it's like the friendship psalm. It really is this one where you just realize, man, we're known and we're loved. And then by the end of the psalm, it's like, I want to be known and loved even more. So it's like a confessional end, to the psalm, which I think is an unusual form in compared to other psalms. But I really love it. It feels like you can hear the close friendship between the psalmist and God himself, and I think we're invited into that, to participate into that and borrow those words for ourselves. So I love that one. I also love the story of Samuel and Hannah and Hannah's prayer, and then asking the Lord, and then the story of Samuel when he's a little boy and he's just moved into the temple, and he hears the Lord's voice 3 times in the middle of the night, and he doesn't know who's calling him, and Eli comes in, or Eli tells him finally after the 3rd time, listen, it's the Lord calling you. And just that, I think that is the patience that's demonstrated in that dialogue, even the drama and the moment in the historic family of God where it says, like, the lamp of the Lord had not yet gone out. Like, this was a dark time, same as when Jesus came on the scene when he was born as a baby. These are like pretty dark times in history, and even now when we think, man, the world feels pretty uncertain, we realize that, like, the Lord is still speaking, he is still moving, he is still calling us. And I think that's been a thread and a theme for me that I've been really thankful to hear.
I love that. One of the things I thought about when you were just retelling that story, it gave me chills just to hear in your voice and the way that you hear that story. I love that. And one of the things that I thought about was how I think a lot of times God, he knows we're not going to hear his voice the first time. He knows we're not going to get it the first time, right? Like, he completely expects us to need him to repeat it several times. And I think that's good almost.
That.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. Because I don't even know where that's coming from the first time. Right. Yeah.
That's so true. Yeah. And we're typically like looking somewhere completely different.
Right.
At first.
Yeah. It must be Eli, because it can't, I don't even have anything to compare it with, and I don't even want to entertain that it could be what I think it might be. Right. Yeah. Yeah. So good. So, well, hey, before I let you go, this has been fantastic. I'm so excited about your book, your project, your ministry, your music. I ask this of all my guests before I let them go, because I love to share resources. Would you give us just a peek into your life right now? What maybe are you reading or studying, listening to, watching? Anything goes that is keeping you uplifted, encouraged, connected to God.
I've been reading a handful of books. There's one called Hearing God by Willard that I had picked up a few years before and kind of came back to it. And it actually has a lot of these themes. You'll probably hear some of that if you dive in. Some of the things I'm talking about are just probably right on the surface because of that. What other things? And I picked up a novel called Jewel by Bret Lott, and that is one that he's like someone that had been in extended circles of friends, and I just love it. It's like a Southern novel, and it's something that is kind of a good counterweight to just to the other more devotional study I've been doing. So, and then I've been working on an album of cover songs, and that's been really fun. So songs that are written by folk artists and Bob Dylan and Leonard Cohen, a lot of people that I've just listened to over the years. There's one we've already put out it's a U2 song, and that's also been just like a breath of fresh air after this year of just recording some songs that are borrowed words. So
I love that, borrowed words. Yeah, because music and the Lord's word in music, and it doesn't even have to be Christian music to be the Lord's word in music for me, right? Yeah, some of my favorite songs that I hear the Lord speak to me so strongly in are not songs that would be played on Christian radio necessarily, but sometimes those words set to music can speak to, break through into my heart in a way that nothing else can. And so I'm so grateful for you and others who continue to use your gifts to bless us and to keep pointing us back to Jesus and help Jesus speak to us in ways that we can hear.
Thank you so much, Angie. It's been really good to, I think connecting the dots between all those things and realizing like all of life, like our work and our family and our relationships are all just like an extension of God's presence with it. Like he's speaking to us in all of it. So I appreciate that about our conversation today, and just that kind of stays with me.
Yay, yay. Well, it has been a delight. And Sandra's new book is Send Out Your Light, and her book and her music and where you can follow her on social media and all that can be found through her website, sandramccracken.com. And I will link all the specifics for all of that and her music and everything in today's show notes. And Sandra, we just can't thank you enough again for spending some time with us today.
I appreciate it so much. Thanks, Angie.
Thank you. And thank you for listening. Until next time, peace.
All right. Cheers.
I loved the way Sandra described our days, that we can experience all the seasons in a 24-hour period. And I am grateful that in all the ups and downs that are our days, our weeks, our years, our lifetime, that the light and truth of God never grows dim. Psalm 43:3, again from the Passion Translation, pour into me the brightness of your daybreak. Pour into me your rays of revolution truth. Let them comfort and gently lead me onto the shining path. Next week, I will be welcoming writer and podcaster Amy Debrick, who will talk to us about overcoming fear and anxiety and allowing courage to have the final say. If you'd like to support the ministry of Steady On, there are 3 things you can do, and all of them are free. First, you can subscribe to the podcast. That helps a ton. Second, you can rate and review this podcast because that helps other people find us. And lastly, you can subscribe to my weekly newsletter by visiting my website, livesteadyon.com, and clicking the orange newsletter button at the top. The link for that is also in today's show notes. I always welcome comments and feedback, so please feel free to reach out to me anytime by emailing steadyonpodcast@gmail.com. Thank you so much for listening. I pray wherever your day takes you, you are walking in the confident knowledge that you are a beloved, cherished child of God. Peace.